a malevolent consciousness that had latched onto their ship, feeding on their fears and doubts, growing stronger as it consumed their hope. In a last-ditch effort, Kane activated a containment field around the entity, hoping to trap it long enough to study it further. The field shimmered into existence, surrounding the entity in a glowing barrier of energy. For a moment, it seemed to work. The entity flickered, its form distorting as it was confined. But then the entity surged forward, crashing against the barrier with a force that made the ship shudder. The field held, but only barely, and Kane knew it wouldn't last long. He hit the emergency alarm, his voice trembling as he called for help. "Captain, the entity, it's in the medbay. I've contained it, but I don't know how long the field will hold." The emergency alarm blared through the ship, sending the crew scrambling to their stations. Captain Volkov and Lieutenant Reyes rushed to the medbay, arriving to find Kane pale and shaken, staring at the flickering containment field that held the entity. "What the hell is that?" Reyes demanded, her eyes wide as she took in the sight of the shadowy figure struggling against the barrier. "It's the entity," Kane replied, his voice tight with fear. "It's part of the void, or maybe it is the void, an extension of its consciousness. It's feeding on our fear, growing stronger every time we give in to it." Volkov's mind raced as she processed this new information. "And you think it's trying to take control of the ship?" Kane nodded. "Yes, if it breaks free, it could take over completely. We need to find a way to destroy it, or at least weaken it enough to drive it out." Ray stared at the entity, her expression hardening. "We can't let that happen. But how do we fight something like this?" Kane hesitated, then spoke slowly, as if working through the problem in real time. "If it's feeding on our fear, then we need to starve it. We need to find a way to shield the crew's minds, to cut off its supply of negative emotions." "And how do we do that?" Volkov asked, her tone urgent. "There are experimental neural dampeners in the medbay," Kane said, his mind racing. "They were designed to calm patients in severe distress, to reduce the intensity of emotional responses. If we can modify them, we might be able to use them to shield the crew from the entity's influence." Volkov nodded, her mind made up. "Do it. Reyes, get your team ready to distribute the dampeners. We'll need to protect the crew as quickly as possible." Reyes didn't hesitate. "Understood, Captain. I'll have my team ready in minutes." As Reyes left to prepare her team, Kane began working on the dampeners, his hands shaking as he adjusted the settings. Volkov watched him, her thoughts racing. They were running out of time, and she knew that if this plan didn't work, they might not get another chance. The modified neural dampeners were distributed to the crew as quickly as possible. Reyes and her security team moved through the ship, explaining the situation to the increasingly panicked crew members and urging them to stay calm. "Listen to me," Reyes said, her voice firm as she handed out the devices. "These dampeners will help protect you from the entity's influence, but you have to stay strong. Don't give in to fear. We're going to get through this, but we need everyone to stay focused." The crew nodded, their faces pale but determined. They were scared, who wouldn't be? But they trusted their leaders, and that trust was enough to keep them moving. Back in the medbay, Kane was making final adjustments to the containment field, trying to strengthen it as much as possible. The entity continued to press against the barrier, its form shifting and pulsing with a dark energy that seemed to sap the light from the room. Volkov stood beside him, watching the entity with narrowed eyes. "How long do we have?" "Not long," Kane admitted, his voice tight with strain. "The containment field is holding for now, but it's getting weaker. The entity is too powerful. It's only a matter of time before it breaks free." Volkov clenched her fists, her mind racing for a solution. "We need to find a way to weaken it before that happens. Is there any way we can disrupt its connection to the void?" Kane considered this for a moment, then nodded slowly. "The energy signature of the void is still present in the entity. If we can isolate that frequency and disrupt it, we might be able to sever its connection, or at least weaken it enough to drive it out." "Do it," Volkov ordered, her voice firm. "Whatever it takes." Kane moved quickly, setting up a series of devices around the containment field, each one calibrated to emit a high-frequency pulse designed to interfere with the entity's energy signature. It was a risky plan. If the pulse didn't work, It could make the entity even stronger, but they were out of options. As Kane worked, the entity began to change. Its form became more defined, more solid, as if it was gathering strength for a final push. The shadows in the room deepened, the temperature dropping to a bone-chilling cold. The air was thick with the smell of ozone, and the humming sound of the entity's presence grew louder, filling their ears with an almost unbearable pressure. "It's now or never," Kane said, his voice trembling as he prepared to activate the pulse. "Are you ready, Captain?" Volkov nodded, her eyes locked on the entity. "Do it." Kane activated the pulse, and the room was filled with a high-pitched whine that seemed to cut through the air like a knife. The entity shuddered, its form distorting as the pulse hit it, and for a moment Volkov thought it might actually work. But then the entity surged forward, crashing against the containment field with a force that made the entire ship shudder. The field flickered, and Volkov could see cracks forming in the energy barrier. "Kane!" she shouted, her voice filled with urgency. "I'm trying!" Kane yelled back, his hands flying over the controls as he tried to stabilize the field. But it was too late. The entity was too strong. With a deafening roar, the containment field shattered, and the entity burst free, its dark form expanding to fill the room. The lights flickered and went out, plunging the medbay into darkness. Volkov stumbled back, her heart pounding in her chest. The entity was free, and it was stronger than ever. "Fall back," she ordered, her voice ringing out through the darkness. "Everyone, fall back." The security team, led by Reyes, rushed into the room, their weapons drawn. But as they fired, the bullets passed through the entity without effect, swallowed by the darkness. "We can't fight it like this," Reyes shouted, her voice barely audible over the roar of the entity's presence. Volkov knew she was right. They needed to regroup, to come up with a new plan before the entity could spread any further. "Everyone, retreat to the secure areas," Volkov ordered. "We need to regroup." The crew obeyed, backing away from the entity as it continued to expand, its form filling the room with a suffocating darkness. As they fled the medbay, Volkov's mind raced. They had failed to contain the entity, and now it was loose on the ship, more powerful than ever. But she couldn't afford to give up. There had to be a way to fight back, to drive it out before it consumed them all. But time was running out, and the darkness was closing in. The crew retreated to the secure areas of the ship, barricading themselves in the command center, engineering, and other vital sections. The entity's presence was felt throughout the ship. Shadows deepened, lights flickered, and the air itself seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. Volkov, Reyes, and Kane regrouped in the command center, their faces grim as they tried to come up with a new plan. The neural dampeners were helping to shield the crew from the entity's influence, but it wasn't enough. The entity was growing stronger, feeding off the fear and despair that had taken hold of the ship. "We can't hold out much longer," Reyes said, her voice filled with frustration. "That thing is going to tear this ship apart, and we won't be able to stop it." Volkov stared at the flickering holographic map of the ship, her mind racing. There had to be a way to fight back, to turn the tide against the entity. But they were running out of time, and the crew was on the verge of breaking. "What if we lure it into the core?" Kane suggested, his voice hesitant. "If we can trap it in the ship's reactor, we might be able to destabilize it, maybe even destroy it." Volkov considered the idea, her mind weighing the risks. It was a dangerous plan, but it might be their only chance. "Do it," she said finally, her voice firm. "Reyes, get the crew ready. We're going to make a last stand." Reyes nodded, her expression determined. "Understood, Captain. We'll be ready." As the crew prepared for the final confrontation, Volkov felt a cold resolve settle over her. The entity had pushed them to the brink, but she wasn't about to let it win. They were going to fight back, and they were going to do whatever it took to survive. The plan was simple, but risky. They would use the ship's systems to lure the entity into the reactor core, then overload the reactor to destabilize its energy signature. It was a long shot, but if it worked, it could weaken the entity enough to drive it out. The crew moved quickly, setting up the necessary equipment and preparing for the final showdown. The entity was still spreading through the ship, but they could feel its presence growing stronger as it converged on the command center. Volkov stood at the center of the room, Her eyes locked on the view screen as the entity's dark form began to take shape, looming outside the secure area. "This is it," she said, her voice steady. "Everyone, hold your positions. We're going to make this count." As the entity moved closer, Volkov gave the order to activate the trap. The ship's systems hummed to life, sending out a signal that drew the entity toward the reactor core. The entity responded, surging toward the trap, its form pulsing with dark energy. The crew watched in tense silence as the entity entered the core, its shadowy form filling the reactor chamber. "Now!" Volkov shouted, and Kane activated the overload sequence. The reactor hummed with power, building to a crescendo as it approached critical mass. The entity shuddered, its form distorting as the energy pulse hit it, tearing at its dark essence. For a moment, it seemed to work. The entity's form flickered, its presence weakening as the reactor's energy disrupted its connection to the void. But then, with a deafening roar, the entity surged back, crashing against the reactor's containment field with a force that sent shockwaves through the ship. "Captain, the reactor is destabilizing," Kane shouted, his voice filled with panic. "We need to shut it down, or it's going to take the whole ship with it." Volkov's mind raced, weighing their options. If they shut down the reactor, the entity would regain its strength and continue to spread. But if they kept it going, they risked destroying the entire ship. "We can't let it win," she said, her voice filled with determination. "We need to give it everything we've got." Reyes nodded, her expression fierce. "We'll hold the line, Captain." Volkov gave the order to push the reactor to its limit, knowing it was a desperate gamble. The reactor's hum grew louder, the ship shaking as the energy pulse intensified, tearing at the entity's form. The entity roared in pain, its dark essence fracturing under the assault. For a moment, it seemed to shrink, its presence fading as the energy pulse consumed it. But then, with a final deafening scream, the entity exploded, sending out a shockwave of dark energy that rippled through the ship. The lights flickered, and for a moment everything went dark. When the lights came back on, the entity was gone. The reactor had stabilized, its energy output returning to normal. The ship was damaged, but it was still intact. Volkov let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, her body sagging with exhaustion. They had won, but it had come at a great cost. Reyes and Kane moved to her side, their expressions filled with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "We did it," Reyes said, her voice filled with disbelief. "We actually did it." Volkov nodded, her mind already turning to the next challenge. The entity was gone, but the void was still out there, and they were still far from home. "We're not done yet," she said, her voice firm. "But we've survived, and that's what matters. Now let's get this ship back on course." As the crew began to pick up the pieces, Volkov felt a renewed sense of determination. They had faced the darkness and come out the other side, and she knew they could do it again if they had to. But as she stared out at the stars, she couldn't shake the feeling that the void wasn't finished with them yet. The chapter ends with the crew of the Astraea exhausted but victorious, having driven out the malevolent entity that had plagued them. But the threat of the void still looms large, and Captain Volkov knows that their journey is far from over. They have survived this battle, but the war is still to come. The Astraea was drifting through space, its engines silent as the crew struggled to recover from their encounter with the entity. The battle had left the ship battered and bruised, with systems offline and damage visible throughout the hull. The crew, too, bore the marks of their ordeal: exhaustion, fear, and a lingering sense of dread that hung in the air like a fog. Captain Mira Volkov stood on the bridge, surveying the damage reports coming in from every department. The reactor was stable, but several key systems were still offline, and the crew was stretched thin, trying to repair the ship while dealing with the psychological aftermath of their encounter with the entity. "We're holding together, but barely," Lieutenant Samara Reyes reported, her voice hoarse from fatigue. "The crew is exhausted, Captain. They've been through hell, and it's going to take time to recover." Volkov nodded, her expression grim. "We can't afford to rest just yet. We're still in uncharted territory, and the void is still out there. We need to get the ship back online and figure out where we are." Reyes hesitated, then spoke quietly. "Captain, the crew is talking. They're worried that we're still not safe, that the entity might not be gone for good. Volkov met her gaze, understanding the fear behind those words. I don't know what's waiting for us out there, but we've faced the worst and survived. We'll keep fighting, and we'll find a way home. Reyes nodded, though the doubt in her eyes was clear. The crew had been pushed to their limits, and Volkov knew it would take more than just words to keep them going. As Reyes left to oversee the repair efforts, Volkov turned her attention back to the view screen, where the familiar stars of their home universe shimmered against the blackness of space. They had escaped the void, but its shadow still lingered in their minds. In the days that followed, the crew worked tirelessly to repair the Astraea. The ship's engines were brought back online, and key systems were restored to functionality, but the damage was extensive and progress was slow. The crew moved through the ship like ghosts, their expressions weary and haunted, their thoughts consumed by the memories of what they had faced. Dr. Elias Kane spent most of his time in the medbay, tending to the crew members who had been most affected by the entity. Some had recovered, their minds slowly clearing as the entity's influence faded, but others remained trapped in a nightmare of their own making, their thoughts fractured and disjointed. Kane was in his lab, analyzing the data from their encounter with the entity, when a faint signal caught his attention. It was a weak, almost imperceptible transmission, buried deep within the ship's communication systems, as if it had been hiding there all along. Frowning, Kane adjusted the settings, isolating the signal and boosting its strength. The transmission crackled to life, a distorted, ghostly voice filling the room. Help! Us! Trapped! Can't escape! Kane's blood ran cold as he recognized the voice. It was the same voice they had heard in the void, the voice of the entity that had tried to take control of their ship. But there was something different about it now, something more human, more desperate. The voice wasn't just an echo, it was a plea for help. Kane quickly ran a trace on the signal, trying to determine its origin. What he found sent a chill down his spine. The signal wasn't coming from within the ship, it was coming from somewhere outside, in the depths of space. Captain, you need to hear this, Kane said, his voice urgent as he activated the intercom. Volkov arrived in the lab moments later, her expression tense. What is it, Doctor? Kane replayed the transmission, his hands shaking as the ghostly voice filled the room once more. Help! Us! Trapped! Can't escape! Volkov's eyes narrowed as she listened. Where is this coming from? Kane pointed to the display. It's coming from outside the ship, from deep space. But that's not the strangest part. There's a temporal distortion associated with the signal. It's as if the transmission is coming from the past, from a time before we even entered the void. Volkov's mind raced as she processed this new information. The entity was gone, but its presence had left something behind. A connection to a past that shouldn't exist. A ghostly echo of a time they thought they had left behind. We need to investigate this, Volkov said finally, her voice steady. If there's a chance that someone or something is still out there, we need to find out what's going on. Kane nodded, his fear giving way to curiosity. I'll set a course for the signal's origin, but Captain, we need to be careful. This could be another trap. Volkov's jaw tightened. I know, but we can't ignore it. We need to know what we're dealing with. As the ship changed course, heading toward the source of the mysterious transmission, Volkov couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far more dangerous than they had faced before. The void had left its mark on them, and now it seemed that mark was calling them back. The Astraea followed the faint signal through the void of space, the journey taking them deeper into uncharted territory. The stars grew distant and cold, their light dimming as if even they were wary of the path the ship was taking. As they approached the signal's source, the crew gathered on the bridge, their faces tense with anticipation. Volkov stood at the center, her eyes fixed on the view screen as the image of a distant object began to take shape. It's a ship, the helmsman reported, his voice hushed. But it's not broadcasting any identification codes. It's just sitting there. The object on the screen was indeed a ship, though its design was unlike anything they had seen before. It was OLD, its hull scarred and pitted, with large sections of it dark and lifeless. The ship floated in space, motionless, as if abandoned long ago. But there was something else, something that sent a chill through the crew. The ship's exterior was shrouded in the same dark, swirling energy that they had seen in the void, the same energy that had manifested as the entity. "Captain, that ship shouldn't be here," Reyes said, her voice tight with fear. "It's like it's been pulled out of time, just like the signal." Volkov's gaze remained locked on the view screen. "Prepare a boarding party. We need to find out what's on that ship." Reyes nodded, though her expression was grim. "Understood, Captain, but we need to be careful. If this is another manifestation of the void, we could be walking into a trap." Volkov knew the risks, but she also knew they couldn't turn back now. The ghostly transmission had led them here, and she was determined to uncover the truth. As the boarding party prepared to disembark, Volkov selected Reyes, Kane, and a small group of security officers to accompany her. They donned their suits and armed themselves, ready for whatever they might encounter on the derelict ship. The shuttle launched from the Astraea, carrying the boarding party across the void to the mysterious vessel. As they approached, the full scale of the ship became apparent. It was massive, far larger than the Astraea, with a design that hinted at a technology far older and more advanced than anything humanity had ever developed. The shuttle docked with the derelict ship, and the boarding party made their way inside. The interior was dark and silent, the air thick with the smell of decay. The walls were covered in strange markings, symbols that seemed to shift and change as they moved. "Stay close," Volkov ordered, her voice steady despite the growing sense of unease. "We don't know what we're dealing with here." As they moved deeper into the ship, the sense of being watched grew stronger. The shadows seemed to move on their own, and the faint echo of footsteps followed them down every corridor. Kane scanned the walls with his equipment, frowning as the readings came in. "Captain, I'm picking up the same temporal distortions that we saw in the signal. It's as if time is fractured here, overlapping with different realities." Volkov's grip on her weapon tightened. "Let's keep moving. We need to find the source of the transmission." The party continued through the ship, their footsteps echoing in the darkness. The corridors twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the heart of the vessel. As they rounded a corner, they came face to face with a sight that made them all stop in their tracks. It was a room filled with dozens of figures, humanoid, but not human. They were suspended in the air, their bodies encased in the same dark energy that had shrouded the ship. Their faces were blank, their eyes closed, as if they were in some kind of stasis. "Are they alive?" Reyes whispered, her voice filled with awe and fear. Kane approached one of the figures, his scanner flickering as it struggled to interpret the readings. "I'm not sure. Their bodies are in a state of suspended animation, but there's still some kind of activity in their brains. It's like they're trapped in a loop, reliving the same moment over and over." Volkov's eyes narrowed as she studied the figures. This is what the entity was doing to us. It was trying to trap us in a loop, just like these people. Reyes nodded, her voice grim. "But who are they? And why are they here?" Before Volkov could respond, the room was suddenly filled with a low, resonant hum. The figures in stasis began to stir, their eyes flickering open as the dark energy around them intensified. "They're waking up," Kane said, his voice trembling with fear. "Captain, we need to get out of here, now." Volkov didn't need to be told twice. "Fall back. Get to the side. Huddle." The boarding party turned and ran, their footsteps pounding through the corridors as the ship around them seemed to come alive. The shadows moved with a life of their own, the walls twisting and warping as the temporal distortions intensified. As they neared the shuttle, the ship shook violently, as if something was trying to tear it apart from the inside. The hum grew louder, filling their ears with a deafening roar. They reached the shuttle just as the ship began to collapse around them, the walls buckling and the floors shattering under the strain of the temporal distortions. Volkov and her team barely made it inside before the shuttle launched, speeding away from the derelict ship as it was consumed by the dark energy. As they put distance between themselves and the ship, Volkov watched as it imploded, collapsing in on itself before disappearing into the void. The shuttle returned to the Astraea, where the crew watched in stunned silence as the derelict ship vanished from their sensors. The mysterious vessel, and whatever secrets it had held, were gone. Volkov removed her helmet, her mind racing as she tried to process what they had just experienced. The ghostly transmission, the derelict ship, the figures in stasis, it all pointed to something far more sinister than they had imagined. "The void isn't just a place," she said quietly, her voice filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "It's a prison, a trap designed to ensnare anyone who gets too close." Reyes nodded, her face pale. "And we just barely escaped." Volkov met her gaze, her resolve hardening. "We need to figure out how to destroy it before it destroys us." The chapter ends with the Astraea drifting in space, the crew shaken by their encounter with the ghost ship, and the realization that the void is far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Captain Volkov knows that their battle is just beginning, and that they must find a way to stop the void before it consumes them all. The Astraea was once again moving through space, but the tension aboard the ship had reached a fever pitch. The encounter with the ghost ship had left the crew shaken and filled with questions that seemed to have no answers. The mysterious figures trapped in stasis, the temporal distortions, and the ship's final implosion had all but confirmed that the void was not just a random anomaly. It was a deliberate construct, a prison designed to capture and torment. Captain Mira Volkov paced the bridge, her mind racing with possibilities. She knew that they were not just dealing with a natural phenomenon, but with something far more insidious, a force that could manipulate time, space, and even the human mind. The crew had faced horrors unimaginable, and she knew that they were running out of time to find a way to stop it. "Captain," Lieutenant Samara Reyes said, breaking the silence, "the crew is on edge. They're starting to question whether we'll ever find a way out of this." Volkov paused, turning to face Reyes. She could see the fatigue in her second-in-command's eyes, the same weariness that she felt deep in her bones. "I understand their fear, Lieutenant, but we can't afford to give in to despair. We need to keep pushing forward, keep searching for answers. We're not going to let the void win." Reyes nodded, though the doubt in her expression remained. "We need a plan, Captain, something to give the crew hope." Volkov's mind churned as she considered their options. The ghost ship had offered more questions than answers, but it had also provided a clue, a faint trail of energy, a signature that matched the entity they had encountered. If they could trace that energy back to its source, they might be able to find the origin of the void, and with it, a way to destroy it. "Dr. Kane," Volkov said, turning to the ship's lead scientist, who had been silently monitoring the situation from his station. "Can we track the energy signet that you are from the ghost ship? Is there any way to follow it back to its source?" Kane's fingers flew over the console, his eyes narrowing as he analyzed the data. "It's faint, but I think we can do it, Captain. The energy signature is erratic, fluctuating in ways that suggest it's being distorted by the same temporal anomalies we encountered before. But if we compensate for those distortions, we might be able to trace it back to its origin." Volkov's heart quickened. This was their chance, perhaps their only chance, to strike back at the void. "Do it, Doctor. Set a course for the source of the energy signature." Kane nodded, his face set in grim determination. "Course plotted, Captain, but I have to warn you, whatever we find at the end of this trail, it's likely to be even more dangerous than what we've already encountered." Volkov met his gaze, her resolve unshaken. "We've faced worse and survived, Doctor. We'll do whatever it takes to end this." As the ship changed course, Volkov felt a renewed sense of purpose. The void had tormented them, driven them to the brink of madness, but now they were taking the fight to it. Whatever lay ahead, she was determined to see this through to the end. The Astraea surged forward, following the faint trail of energy left behind by the ghost ship. The journey took them deeper into uncharted space, far beyond the boundaries of known star systems. The stars themselves seemed to grow more distant, their light dimming as if even they feared the path the ship was taking. As the crew worked to maintain the ship and keep their minds focused, the tension on board grew palpable. The memories of their encounters with the void lingered in their minds, haunting them in their quiet moments. But despite their fear, they continued to press forward, driven by the hope that they might finally uncover the truth behind the nightmare they had been trapped in. On the bridge, Volkov kept a close eye on the sensors, watching as the energy signature grew stronger. The trail was leading them toward a region of space that had never been charted, a place where the laws of physics seemed to break down completely. "Captain," Kane said, his voice tense, "we're approaching the source of the energy signature, but the readings are strange. It's as if space itself is warping around us." Volkov frowned, her grip tightening on the console. "What do you mean, Doctor?" Kane hesitated, his eyes scanning the data. "It's hard to explain, Captain. The fabric of space-time is fluctuating. Gravity, time, even the basic structure of matter. It's as if we're on the edge of a dimensional rift, a tear in the fabric of the universe." Volkov's heart skipped a beat. They were entering the heart of the void, a place where reality itself was unraveling. Can the ship hold together in these conditions? "I believe so," Kane replied, though his voice was tinged with uncertainty. "But we need to be prepared for anything. This could be the most dangerous environment we've ever encountered." Volkov nodded, her mind racing. "Bring us in slowly. We need to get as close as we can without putting the ship at risk." As the Astraea edged closer to the source of the energy signature, the view outside the ship began to change. The stars blurred, their light bending and twisting in impossible ways. Space itself seemed to ripple like water, distorting everything around it. "Captain, I'm detecting a massive gravitational anomaly ahead," Kane reported, his voice strained. It's like nothing I've ever seen. The energy signature is coming from within it, but it's almost impossible to get a clear reading." Volkov's gaze remained locked on the view screen, where the anomaly loomed ahead like a dark, swirling vortex. It was the heart of the void, the source of the entity, and the ghostly echoes that had tormented them. "Prepare to drop out of warp," Volkov ordered, her voice steady. "We're going in." Hip shuddered as it dropped out of warp, the swirling vortex growing larger on the view screen. The gravitational forces tugged at the ship, but the Astraea held together, its shields straining against the onslaught. As they drew closer, the source of the energy signature became clear, a massive structure, half hidden within the swirling darkness of the vortex. It was ancient, its surface scarred and worn by eons of exposure to the forces of the void. "What is that?" Reyes whispered, her eyes wide with awe and fear. Kane's hands trembled as he scanned the structure. "It's some kind of construct, Captain. Possibly a gateway or a control center for the void itself. The energy signature is coming from deep within it." Volkov's heart raced as she considered their next move. This was it, the heart of the void, the place where it all began. If they could reach the center of the construct, they might be able to shut it down, to end the nightmare once and for all. "Prepare a boarding party," Volkov ordered, her voice filled with determination. "We're going in." The shuttle descended toward the ancient construct, its hull vibrating with the strain of the gravitational forces. Volkov, Reyes, Kane, and a team of security officers prepared themselves for what lay ahead, their expressions tense as they checked their equipment and readied their weapons. As the shuttle approached the surface, the scale of the construct became apparent. It was vast, stretching out into the darkness as far as the eye could see, its surface covered in strange alien markings that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. The shuttle docked with a small access point, and the boarding party disembarked, stepping onto the surface of the construct. The air was thick and heavy, filled with a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through their bones. "This place is alive," Kane said, his voice filled with awe and fear. "The energy readings are off the charts. It's as if the entire structure is a living organism, feeding off the energy of the void." Volkov's eyes narrowed as she surveyed their surroundings. "Stay focused. We need to find the source of the energy signature and shut it down." The party moved cautiously through the construct, their footsteps echoing in the darkness. The walls seemed to pulse with a faint light, casting eerie shadows that danced and flickered as they passed. As they ventured deeper into the structure, the sense of being watched grew stronger. The air was thick with tension, and the low hum grew louder, vibrating through the walls and floors. They reached a large chamber, its walls covered in strange symbols and markings that seemed to shift and change as they moved. In the center of the room was a massive, pulsating core, its surface covered in tendrils of dark energy that writhed and twisted like living things. "This is it," Kane said, his voice trembling with fear and awe. The heart of the void. This core is the source of the energy signature, the control center for the entire anomaly. Volkov's heart pounded in her chest as she approached the core. The air around it was thick with a dark, oppressive energy, and she could feel its pull, tugging at her mind, her thoughts. "We need to shut it down," she said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "Kane, can you do it?" Kane hesitated, his hands shaking as he studied the core. I think so, Captain, but it's going to be dangerous. If we destabilize the core, it could cause a chain reaction, one that might destroy the entire construct and possibly take us with it." Volkov's mind raced as she weighed their options. They were out of time, out of choices. This was their only chance to stop the void, to end the nightmare that had consumed them. "Do it," she ordered, her voice filled with resolve. "Whatever it takes." Kane nodded, his face set in grim determination. He approached the core, his hands trembling as he began to set up the equipment. The tendrils of dark energy seemed to react to his presence, twisting and writhing as if trying to reach out to him. As Kane worked, the hum of the core grew louder, the energy around it intensifying. The walls of the chamber began to vibrate, and the air grew thick with a suffocating pressure. "We don't have much time," Reyes said, her voice tense. "We need to get out of here before this place goes up." Kane finished the final adjustments and stepped back, his face pale with fear. "It's done, Captain. The core is set to destabilize. We have 5 minutes to get clear before it blows." Volkov nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "Everyone, move." The boarding party turned and ran, their footsteps echoing through the corridors as the construct around them began to shake and tremble. The walls pulsed with a dark, malevolent energy, and the low hum had become a deafening roar. As they neared the shuttle, the construct began to collapse, the walls buckling and the floors shattering under the strain of the destabilizing core. The energy around them surged, tearing at the very fabric of reality. They reached the shuttle just as the chamber behind them imploded, sending out a shockwave of dark energy that rippled through the construct. The shuttle launched, speeding away from the collapsing structure as the core reached critical mass. From the shuttle's windows, they watched as the construct was consumed by the dark energy, its form collapsing in on itself before disappearing into the void. The shuttle raced away from the collapsing construct, the crew holding their breath as the shockwave of dark energy expanded behind them. The view screen filled with swirling light and darkness as the very fabric of space seemed to tear apart. On the bridge of the Astraea, the crew watched in stunned silence as the ancient construct imploded, sending out ripples of energy that distorted the surrounding space. The gravitational forces tugged at the ship, but the shields held, keeping them from being pulled into the chaos. Volkov and the boarding party returned to the ship, their faces drawn with exhaustion and relief. They had done it. They had reached the heart of the void and destroyed the source of its power. But the cost had been high, and the danger was far from over. "Status report," Volkov ordered as she stepped onto the bridge, her voice calm but strained. "Captain, the construct is gone, but the energy readings are off the charts," the helmsman reported, his voice tight with fear. "The fabric of space is collapsing around the area where the construct was. We need to get out of here now." Volkov nodded, her mind racing. They had destabilized the core, but in doing so, they had triggered a collapse that was threatening to consume everything around it. If they didn't escape the area quickly, they could be caught in the destruction. "Plot a course out of the anomaly," she ordered, her voice firm. "Maximum warp. Get us clear of the collapse." The ship's engines roared to life, and the Astraea surged forward, racing away from the collapsing anomaly. The gravitational forces tugged at the ship, but Volkov kept her focus, guiding the ship through the chaotic space as the anomaly collapsed behind them. The view screen filled with blinding light as the anomaly reached critical mass, the swirling energy consuming everything in its path. The ship shuddered under the strain, but Volkov refused to give up, pushing the engines to their limit. Finally, with a final burst of speed, the Astraea broke free of the collapsing anomaly, leaving the destruction behind them. The ship surged into clear space, the view screen clearing to reveal the familiar stars of their home universe. The crew let out a collective breath, relief flooding the bridge as they realized they had escaped the collapse. They had done it. They had destroyed the heart of the void and survived. Boo. As Volkov looked out at the stars, she knew that their journey was not over. The void had been a prison, a trap designed to ensnare those who ventured too close. But they had escaped, and now they had to find a way home. The chapter ends with the Astraea drifting through space, the crew exhausted but alive, their mission far from over. They have destroyed the source of the void's power, but the journey ahead is still fraught with danger. Captain Volkov knows that they have come too far to turn back now, and she is determined to see her crew home, no matter what it takes. The Astraea drifted through space, the once vibrant hum of its engines now a quiet murmur as the ship coasted away from the collapsing anomaly. The crew, exhausted and battered from their ordeal, were finally beginning to let the tension ease from their shoulders. They had destroyed the heart of the void, collapsing the malevolent construct that had nearly claimed their lives. But the victory felt hollow, heavy with the weight of the unknown dangers that still lay ahead. Captain Mira Volkov stood on the bridge, her gaze fixed on the view screen, where the distant glow of the collapsing anomaly slowly faded from view. The silence on the bridge was deafening. It was the kind of quiet that follows a storm, a silence filled with the echoes of what had been lost and the realization that the storm might not be over. "Status report," Volkov commanded, her voice steady but edged with fatigue. Lieutenant Samara Reyes, her second-in-command, looked up from her console, her expression one of cautious relief. "The anomaly has completely collapsed, Captain. We're clear of the immediate danger. The ship's systems are stable, though we've sustained significant damage to the hull and several key systems. The crew is holding up, but they're exhausted. We all are." Volkov nodded, understanding the unspoken words. They had survived, but they were far from safe. The collapse of the anomaly had unleashed a wave of energy that had left their ship and their minds strained to the breaking point. "We've come this far," Volkov said, her voice firm as she tried to rally the crew. "We'll get through this. We just need to hold on a little longer." Reyes gave a small nod, though the wariness in her eyes spoke volumes. "What's our next move, Captain?" Volkov took a deep breath, considering their options. They were still lost in uncharted space, far from any known star systems. Their navigation systems had been damaged in the escape, and it would take time to repair them. For now, all they could do was keep moving forward and hope that they could find their way back to familiar territory. "First, we focus on repairs," Volkov decided. "Get our navigation systems back online and run a full diagnostic on the ship. We need to make sure we're ready for whatever comes next." Reyes acknowledged the order and relayed it to the crew. The bridge slowly came back to life as the officers returned to their duties, the tension still thick in the air, but tempered by the determination to press on. As the crew began their work, Volkov allowed herself a moment of reflection. They had faced horrors beyond imagining, and they had survived. But at what cost? The crew had been pushed to their limits, and she knew that the psychological toll would be difficult to overcome. The void may have been destroyed, but its influence lingered, like a shadow that refused to lift. Down in the medbay, Dr. Elias Kane was tending to the crew members who had been most affected by the events within the void. Some were still unconscious, their minds trapped in a state of shock from the trauma they had endured. Others were awake but distant, their eyes haunted by the memories of what they had seen. Kane himself was running on fumes, his hands trembling as he checked the vitals of one of the patients. He had barely slept since they had first encountered the entity, and the strain was beginning to show. "How are they?" a voice asked from behind him. Kane turned to see Captain Volkov standing in the doorway, her expression one of concern. "They're stable," Kane replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "Physically, they're fine, but mentally, I don't know if some of them will ever fully recover. The void left its mark on all of us, and I'm not sure how to erase it." Volkov approached one of the patients, a young officer named Ensign Patel, who had been one of the first to succumb to the entity's influence. She was conscious but unresponsive, her eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. "Is there anything we can do for them?" Volkov asked quietly. Kane hesitated, then shook his head. I've tried everything I can think of, but their minds are still trapped in whatever nightmare the void put them in. All we can do now is give them time and hope that they find their way back on their own. Volkov's heart ached at the sight of her crew in such a state. They had fought so hard to survive, only to be left with scars that might never heal. But she couldn't let herself dwell on the losses, not when there were still so many others who needed her to be strong. "We'll find a way to help them," Volkov said, her voice filled with quiet determination. "We'll get through this, together." Kane offered a weak smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I hope you're right, Captain." Volkov stayed with the doctor for a few more moments, offering what little comfort she could before returning to the bridge. The crew needed to see that their captain was still in control, still fighting for them. Even if she didn't have all the answers, she had to keep moving forward. As she walked through the corridors, Volkov noticed the uneasy glances exchanged between crew members, the whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when she passed. The fear that had gripped them in the void had not released its hold. The crew was waiting for the next shoe to drop, the next impossible horror to emerge from the darkness, and Volkov couldn't blame them. She felt it too, the sense that they were not out of danger, that something still lingered on the edge of perception, waiting to strike. As the Astraea continued its slow journey through space, the crew focused on repairing the damage to the ship's systems. The process was slow and grueling, but progress was being made. The navigation systems were beginning to come back online, and the ship's engines were running at full power once more. But despite these small victories, a sense of unease continued to grow among the crew. The void had been destroyed, but it had left behind a residue, a lingering presence that seemed to permeate the very air of the ship. Strange occurrences began to plague the crew, flickering lights, sudden drops in temperature, and the occasional whispering voice that seemed to echo from the walls. Volkov couldn't ignore the signs any longer. Something was still wrong, something they had missed. She called a meeting of her senior officers to discuss the situation. "We've made progress on the repairs," Reyes reported, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. "But the crew is on edge. We've had multiple reports of strange phenomena, cold spots, flickering lights, even voices. It's like the void is still with us." Volkov nodded, her expression grim. "I've noticed it too. We may have destroyed the heart of the void, but its influence is still lingering. We need to find out why." Kane was silent for a moment before speaking, his voice filled with uncertainty. "Captain, I've been running some scans on the ship, and I've found traces of residual energy. Dark energy, the same type we encountered in the void. It's weak, but it's present throughout the ship. I believe that when we destroyed the construct, some of that energy was released and has been absorbed by the ship." Volkov's stomach turned at the thought. "Are we in danger?" Kane hesitated, then shook his head. "Not immediately. The energy is weak, but it's causing disruptions, affecting the ship's systems and potentially the crew's minds. It's possible that this energy could manifest into something more dangerous if left unchecked." Reyes frowned, her tone skeptical. "Manifest? You mean like the entity?" Kane nodded. "It's a possibility. The energy is unstable, and if it coalesces into a single point, it could take on a form of its own, a new entity born from the remnants of the void." Volkov felt a chill run down her spine. They had fought so hard to escape the void, only to bring a piece of it with them. "What can we do to stop it?" "I'm working on a solution," Kane replied, though his voice lacked confidence. "But it's difficult to isolate and neutralize this kind of energy. It's pervasive, almost like a virus, infecting the ship's systems and the crew. We need to find a way to purge it before it becomes something we can't control." Volkov's mind raced as she considered their options. They had to act quickly, before the residual energy had a chance to manifest into something more dangerous. But they were already stretched thin, and she knew the crew was at their breaking point. "Do whatever it takes, Doctor," Volkov said finally, her voice firm. "We can't afford to let this get out of hand." Kane nodded, though his face remained troubled. "I'll do my best, Captain, but we need to prepare for the possibility that this energy could become something more dangerous. If that happens, we may have to take drastic measures." Volkov didn't like the sound of that. but she knew he was right. They had to be ready for anything. Keep me updated on your progress, and let the crew know that we're working on the problem. They need to see that we're still in control. As the meeting ended, Volkov remained in the conference room, staring out at the stars. They had survived so much, but the fight wasn't over. The remnants of the void still clung to them, a shadow that refused to lift. And now, with the threat of a new entity forming, she knew that the worst might still be ahead of them. Over the next few days, Kane and his team worked tirelessly to develop a method for purging the dark energy from the ship. The process was complex and fraught with risks. If they didn't execute it perfectly, they could inadvertently trigger the very manifestation they were trying to prevent. Meanwhile, the strange occurrences continued to plague the crew. The whispers grew louder, the lights flickered more frequently, and some crew members reported seeing shadowy figures moving in the corners of their vision, figures that vanished when approached. Volkov knew they were running out of time. The energy was growing stronger, and she feared it wouldn't be long before it manifested into a new threat. But she refused to let fear take hold of her crew. They had faced worse and survived, and she was determined to see them through this as well. Finally, Kane's team was ready. They had developed a procedure to isolate and neutralize the dark energy, a delicate operation that would require precision and coordination. If it worked, they could purge the energy from the ship and prevent it from becoming something more dangerous. "Captain, we're ready to proceed," Kane said, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. "But I have to warn you, this process is risky. If we make a mistake, the energy could coalesce into something we can't control." Volkov nodded, her face set in determination. "We don't have a choice, Doctor. We need to stop this before it's too late." The procedure began, with Kane and his team working meticulously to isolate the dark energy from the ship's systems. The process was slow and grueling, with every step fraught with danger. The tension on the bridge was palpable as the crew watched the progress, their hearts in their throats. But as the procedure continued, the energy began to react. The lights on the bridge flickered wildly, and the air grew thick with a palpable sense of dread. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent, and the temperature dropped sharply. "Captain, the energy is destabilizing," Kane shouted, his voice filled with alarm. "It's trying to coalesce, trying to manifest." Volkov's heart raced as she realized what was happening. They were too late. The energy was already beginning to take form, feeding off the fear and tension that gripped the ship. "Shut it down, Kane," Volkov ordered, her voice filled with urgency. "Shut it down before it's too late." But before Kane could respond, the lights on the bridge went out, plunging the room into darkness. The air was filled with the sound of static, and the temperature continued to drop, the cold seeping into their bones. Then, in the darkness, a figure began to take shape, a shadowy form that pulsed with a dark, malevolent energy. The whispers grew louder, filling their ears with an unbearable noise, and the figure began to move, slowly advancing toward them. Volkov's blood ran cold as she realized what they were facing, a new entity, born from the remnants of the void, more powerful and dangerous than before. "We need to get out of here," Reyes shouted, her voice filled with panic. "Now!" But the entity was already upon them, its dark form swirling and expanding as it reached out with tendrils of energy. The crew backed away, their weapons drawn, but they knew it was useless. This was no longer a battle they could fight with conventional means. "Nova, activate emergency lockdown," Volkov ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Seal off the bridge." The AI responded immediately, the doors sealing shut with a hiss of air. The entity roared in frustration, its tendrils lashing out at the walls as it searched for a way to escape. "Kane, can you contain it?" Volkov demanded, her voice tight with fear. Kane worked frantically at his console, his hands trembling as he tried to regain control of the procedure. "I'm trying, Captain, but it's too powerful. It's feeding off the energy of the ship. It's growing stronger." Volkov knew they were out of time. If they didn't find a way to stop the entity, it would consume the entire ship, just as the original entity had tried to do. "Reyes, get the crew to the escape pods," Volkov ordered, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "We need to get them off the ship before this thing takes over." Reyes hesitated, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "What about you, Captain?" Volkov met her gaze, her resolve unshaken. "I'll hold it off as long as I can. Now go." Reyes nodded, though the doubt in her eyes was clear. "Good luck, Captain." As Reyes and the remaining crew members fled the bridge, Volkov turned to face the entity, her heart pounding in her chest. She had faced horrors beyond imagining, and she knew that this might be the end. But she refused to let the void win. "Kane, is there any way to destabilize it?" Volkov asked, her voice filled with determination. Kane hesitated, then nodded slowly. "There's one way, Captain. We can overload the ship's power core, flood it with energy, and destabilize the entity, but it will destroy the ship." Volkov's mind raced as she weighed their options. They were out of time, out of choices. If they didn't act now, the entity would consume them all. "Do it," Volkov ordered, her voice firm. "Overload the core and evacuate the ship. We can't let this thing escape." Kane hesitated for a moment, then nodded, his face set in grim determination. "Understood, Captain." As Kane worked to initiate the overload, Volkov watched as the entity continued to expand, its dark form pulsing with energy. The ship shook violently as the power core began to overload, the lights flickering wildly as the energy levels spiked. "Captain, the core is overloading," Kane ordered, his voice filled with tension. "We need to get out of here." Volkov nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "Let's go." The two of them fled the bridge, the ship shaking violently as the overload process reached critical levels. The entity roared in frustration, its tendrils lashing out at the walls as it tried to escape. They reached the escape pods just as the ship began to tear itself apart, the power core reaching critical mass. The entity's roars filled the air, its form distorting and fracturing as the energy surged through the ship. Volkov and Kane launched their escape pod, speeding away from the ship just as the power core detonated, sending out a massive shockwave that consumed the Astraea. The entity's final roar echoed through the void, its form disintegrating as the ship was destroyed. As the escape pod drifted through space, Volkov watched in silence as the Astraea, their home for so long, was consumed by the explosion. The void had claimed one final victory, but she knew that they had done what was necessary to stop it. "We did it," Kane said quietly, his voice filled with a mixture of relief and sorrow. "We stopped it."